breaking down the differences between isolation and quarantine. I'm Heather Hope in Kearney Mesa. Coming up, we'll tell you what medical experts are saying.
This is News 8 at 5.
I'm kind of like surprised that it seems like I'll have double the time that the COVID person has in terms of isolation.
Confusion over the time limits for those in quarantine versus isolation. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Carlo Cicchetto. Caring for someone infected with COVID presents a challenge when they live in your household. Doctors stress being in isolation and quarantine, but those terms often overlap. News 8's Heather Hope gets clarity from a local doctor.
And there is a different timeline for those on quarantine and those in isolation. I have a cousin in both, one in quarantine and one in isolation, and a doctor breaks down those time limits.
I worry, like, am I going to start having those symptoms they talk about?
At home, my cousin Elaine Cooper in Los Angeles has been in quarantine while her son Mark in college is also home, but with COVID and the flu.
Right now I'm in a different room with the door closed, but again, I know particles can travel, so it's a question of, is it inevitable or are there good things you can do?
Doctors say those who are infected need to isolate in a separate room at home, while those in quarantine need to stay home and not have contact with anyone. But for how long? And what if you're the sick person's caregiver?
People are generally most infectious kind of at that starting period. Right when they develop symptoms.
UCSD Assistant Clinical Professor Dr. Shira Abeles says those with COVID isolate for 10 days, but those in quarantine may be in it for at least 14 days.
Right now, it is 10 days from start of symptoms to the end of symptoms because we know you have a lot of virus that you're shedding and you're quite contagious and extremely contagious with Omicron in that beginning.
Dr. Abeles says someone could be spreading the virus for 5 to 7 days. They can come out of isolation on day 11 if they no longer have symptoms. A quarantine person with no symptoms could also be done sooner if they are vaccinated and get tested.
There are some people who do test during that time and may be able to have their quarantine shortened to 10 days if they can test negative and continue to have no symptoms.
Elaine says her son should be out of isolation on Christmas Day.
Just looking forward to him being healthy and that we can kind of return to our normal routine.
But what if you're immunocompromised? New at 6, a doctor explains how that quarantine or isolation period could be much longer. Heather Hope, News 8.